Today is February 8th, 2014, and this is LaVora Perry with Veronica Bunkley doing a Voicing in Action Project interview for the Social Justice Institute. And Nia Perry Richardson is on camera.
I grew up in East Cleveland. We lived on Brightwood Street or Avenue. And I went to Superior Elementary from first grade until sixth grade. Then I went to Kirk Junior High, seventh and eighth, and Shaw High from 9 until 12. And then I went for maybe a quarter to Ohio University, but came back home due to finances and went to Cleveland State, went to South Carolina State in Orangeburg, South Carolina for 2.5 years on a music scholarship. And then I returned to East Cleveland, got married, had 2 children, and we lived in East Cleveland.
Where'd you live?
It was on Forest Hills Boulevard. I forget the name of the apartments. I think it was the Forest Hills. I can't remember. But we lived there for a couple of years, and then we moved to Cleveland Heights, just up the hill. And I had 2 more children, and adopted 2. And then we moved to Richmond Heights, which is where we live now. In the meantime, I had finished, or I had not finished college before I got married. And after my second son was born, I returned to school at Cleveland State until I eventually earned my bachelor's degree. And then I got a job working as a secretary at John Carroll University for about 4 or 5 years. And then I took a job at Cleveland State as a secretary for 2 scholarship programs that provided scholarship monies for minorities who wanted to become teachers. And the coordinator of one program, she took another job and she recommended me to replace her. And so for a while I was the coordinator of one program, still the secretary of the other, and I was attempting to return to school for graduate study. And, married and raising, at that time, 3 children. So eventually I had to let some things go. I put my education on hold, focused on the job, and then eventually I became an academic advisor for the College of Education at Cleveland State University. Then I returned to school and got my master's degree in psychology with a diversity management certificate. And that's where I am now at Cleveland State as an academic advisor and instructor, and that's
okay. So I have a few questions. When did you move out of East Cleveland? When you you went to college, and then you got married, and you lived in Forest Hill Boulevard in apartments, you said?
Yes.
Are those apartments still there? Because
yes, they are.
On Forest Hill Boulevard.
On the corner of Terrace and Forest Hills Boulevard. Let's say the 4 corners.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
I think it's Forest Hills Park Apartments. Then there's some on the other side of Forest Hills Boulevard. Then there's the park. And then there's, I think, another apartment building a little bit from the corner that used to be a senior citizens. Because as a matter of fact, one of my grandmothers lived there during the time that I lived at the apartments.
Okay. And what did you get your initial degree in?
Communication, organizational communication.
Okay. And that was from Cleveland State,
yes.
Right? Um, and what was it like growing up on Brightwood?
Um, it was bittersweet, I would say. When we first moved, the majority of the families were white. I remember one of my early childhood friends, her name was Karen. She lived in, I guess, what could be described as like a row house. It almost seemed like an apartment, where there were like 3 attached homes. They had upstairs, downstairs. But her name was Karen. We were in the same classroom, and her father raised her and her brother. I forget his name. And I was allowed to go and play at her house. She lived on the opposite side of the street, closer to Euclid Avenue. My home was on the other side, kind of midway between Euclid and Forest Hills. So, my parents were pretty protective of us, but they would allow me to go play at her house, and she was welcome at ours. But I noticed her dad didn't let her come to our house as much.
And she was Caucasian?
Yes. And she was also disabled. She was missing I think she had just maybe her thumb, forefinger, and pinky. And so a lot of the kids didn't want to play with her because of that. But, it didn't bother me. We were friends. She was a sweet little girl. And then they moved away. And
now, what year was that when you moved to?
That was 1966, I believe.
That's when you moved on to Brightwood?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because I know I was 5, maybe 1960, the end of 66. And in September, because I started school. And I was 5, but I'm trying to think, did I turn 5? I had just turned 5 and I started kindergarten, but for some reason, I know I was always one of the younger children in my class. And again, there were a number of white families on the street, and even at Superior, if you looked at my first grade picture, which I looked at not too long ago, I have it posted on Facebook. There's, quite a number, there's a mix of children. And I would say by the time I got to 4th, 5th grade, the city and, of course, the school district had become predominantly black. Brightwood, it was nice because you could walk to the corner of Euclid and Brightwood, and there were stores, that sold penny candy. My brothers and I would look around the house for change, falling in between the couch cushions, and we'd collect pennies. 100 pennies, go buy 100 pieces of candy and eat most of it. We'd also use that money we'd buy like a package of cookies, and we'd buy Kool-Aid for 10 cents a pack or something. And we'd make lemonade and have our lemonade stand. We'd sell cookies and lemonade and candy.
You sold it on Brightwood or
Yes,
Euclid?
on Brightwood. We'd have a little stand out front. And I remember at the time, our house seemed huge. I remember when we first moved into it, we were coming from a duplex where we lived downstairs, and there was a family that lived upstairs. And the lady who lived upstairs used to babysit myself and my younger brother. But then, my stomach's growling. But then when we moved, the conditions had really gotten dismal. We had roaches and rats, and my mother was worried about our safety, so they decided to move. And so when we moved into the Brightwood house, it was it was 4 bedrooms, an attic, and a basement, and to me it seemed like a mansion. But since I became an adult and went back and looked, it was, the smallest house with a little postage stamp front lawn and backyard, but it was, for us, it was a family of 7, 5 kids and 2 adults. It was definitely a step up. I remember the first night we spent there, it was like an adventure. We didn't have all of our furniture there yet, and the floors were hardwood. We hadn't put down carpet or anything. And there was this old-fashioned stove in the basement. I remember it being white. It looks like something you'd see in the 30s or 40s. But because we hadn't, our stove and refrigerator hadn't yet arrived, my mom cooked a meal for us in the basement. I remember it was pork and beans and probably hot dogs or something. And that was fun. And there was the old washer with the wringer that you had to be careful not to get your hands caught in that. And then I remember one of my sisters and I, we went exploring and, looking through the rooms, and the closets just seemed so huge. And the previous owners had left a bowl of candy for us, which I thought was nice. And it's funny I can remember all this stuff. I mean, I was pretty little, but it made an impression on me. Then I remember, when the carpenters, the men came to lay the carpet in our front parlor room. And I loved that house because it had 2 staircases. It was like the front door you'd enter into what was the parlor, but we called it the TV room. And there was a stairway, and it had like a window cut out where you would come down the stairs and there's the wall, but then once you got to the open window, you saw the person coming down. Then it was a back stairway that I guess was for, leads into the kitchen. I remember hiding on those stairs sometimes, or, running through with my brothers and, preferring one staircase, to the other. Then there was a living room, and it had a fireplace, which we never used. Then the dining room had sliding doors, wood doors, but one of them stuck, so we never got to use those. Then there was a room off the dining room that was maybe like a butler's pantry or something. And my mom used to keep a freezer in that room and the ironing board. Then the kitchen, beautiful wood cabinets, I remember. I'm not sure what type of wood, but I just know it was a beautiful reddish wood cabinets, blue linoleum floor, double sink, and and of course we had the stove there and the refrigerator. We used to eat our meals. The kids would eat at the kitchen table, but my parents, they would eat separately. Usually my dad ate in front of the TV with the tray. And I'm not sure where my mother ate. I don't know. She didn't sit at the table with us, but, And let's see what else. My best friend lived directly across the street from me.
This is the girl you were talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
she moved. Well, no, this is a different girl.
Okay.
Once the like I said, the white families began to move away, and black families would move in. The homeowners, took a lot of pride in their lawns and everything, especially my mother. She kind of developed a reputation for being mean, and the kids would play in the street, and if we were playing kickball or any bounce or touch football, if the ball landed on my mom's, on our lawn, you had to ask permission. Can I please get my ball? And she'd go ahead, But, and I remember the neighbors looking out for one another too. There was this one woman, her name, I think was Miss Asinine of all names. She was a very old white woman, and she lived about 3 homes down. And She was probably the last white person to remain on our street. I mean, for years. I think she lived there until she passed away. But, and her son would come and visit her, check on her every now and then. But one time when we were all kids, my mom went to a PTA meeting. My dad was at work, and so she caught the bus, You could catch the 6 bus right at the corner of our street, from Euclid all the way up to Shaw. But anyway, she went to a PTA meeting, and she left my 2 older sisters in charge, and they were fighting over the TV. One wanted to watch something. So there was just a big fight. The 2 sisters, my oldest brother trying to break them up, myself and my younger brother hollering and crying. And I guess we were pretty loud. So anyway, when my mother was walking up the street from the meeting, Miss Asinine came out and said, I started to call the police. There was so much noise going on at your house, I didn't know what was going on. So my mom, I guess she thanked her. She came home and she, wanted to whoop everybody. And, she said, how dare you make all that noise? And Miss Asinine heard you, and, you should know better. And I remember thinking, well, don't you care about the fight? You just care. You just care that we were heard, but that's the way it was. Families looked out for each other.
Was there any talk? Do you remember any conversations about how the neighborhood changed so rapidly at that time?
Yeah, I remember. Kind of remember hearing my mom and dad talk about it. About Miss So and So left or so and so left, and there's that new family moving in, and they don't care about their property, and But for the most part, I'd say the people that moved in to replace the white families, they were just like us. 2 parents struggling, trying to work and pay their bills and raise their kids, make sure they got a good education. Like my best friend that moved across the street, her family moved in, and when I was in 3rd grade, that's when we met. And so I'd been, there a couple of years before she moved in. They were a good example. They, welcomed me into their home. We welcomed her into ours. We would, go back and forth across the street and play. They went on family outings and, invited myself and my brothers along, and same with us. There was maybe 2 families that did move on the street, and they did seem to be a little different in that they fought. I mean, I don't know what the feud was, but it kind of reminds me of the Hatfields and the McCoys.
You mean the 2 families fought with each other?
The 2 families fought each other. They lived on opposite sides of the street. And I remember, maybe I was about 8 or so, walking down the street with one of my sisters to the store, and shots being fired, and this was in like the 70s, And so we ducked our heads and ran. And from that point on, my mother didn't want us to go, to the store on foot anymore. And that was the families, Nothing like you would hear today. I think, when I think back on it, it probably was they got so heated and they're arguing and somebody fired a gun as a warning. I don't know that they were actually shooting at each other, but, we heard the pop and it was scary, So, and I was about 8 or 9. I remember my next door neighbors lived in a brick house, and it was 2 sisters, and they were white. And, they used to hire my brother to do their lawn and stuff, and, they were really nice and sweet. But when they moved, then the family that replaced them, they were loud and they fought. And our houses were really right next to each other. The driveways were so narrow, you could, whether you wanted to or not, you heard them. the kids, my parents, I don't know, I think they kind of sheltered us, didn't really promote a lot of fighting, but if someone messes with you, you take up for your siblings, you don't start anything, but if you get into a fight, you better finish it. Well, the neighbors that lived next door to us, they were, I guess their approach was, hey, I'm new on this turf and I'm gonna make it mine. Mm-hmm. And they wanted, they would pick fights with us. And I remember the one sister and my best friend that lived across the street, she, they fought. And my best friend was like me. She didn't want to fight, but this girl was relentless and picked on her, so she, fought her, and then they became friends. I never liked her because, why do you have to fight? But, it was a gradual shift, and I remember hearing my parents talk about, the possibility of moving. Then my dad was like, well, I don't want to move. I want to stay here, and we're just going to have to make it work for us. So we did. Sometimes the other neighbors, as they moved in, they would look at us and think, oh, you're too good to come out and play. Or, you hear people talk about how when the street lights came on, you better be home. Well, yeah, that's how it was for us. But some kids would stay out. My mother was like, no, you get your behind in here. You've got to get ready for school, do your homework, wash the dishes, and, stuff like that. So, and then when I was in, I think maybe 3rd or 4th grade, I started playing a musical instrument, and that took up a lot of my time. One thing about my mother I really appreciate is that she explored a lot of opportunities for us kids. She found out about free programs, and she enrolled us in we were walking distance from University Circle. She found out about summer art classes at the Art Institute, and she enrolled us. I took up the violin and became friends with another girl that played violin, and her mom was taking her to the music settlement. And so she talked to my mom and said, your daughter seems pretty good. Maybe I'll have my daughter's teacher take a look at her,
And this was a girl on your street or from
No,
your
this
classes?
is a girl from school.
Oh, okay.
And so, I auditioned for her teacher, and he said, I'm not taking any more students, but I think you should definitely take lessons. So anyway, that started. So my mother, she kind of involved us in a lot of extracurriculars, kind of to keep us out of trouble, I guess. And it was the same way with my other brothers and sisters. We learned how to play musical instruments, or sang in the choir, or, did student council, stuff like that. So as I got older, I spent less time on the street and more time in the greater community, coming to the library. I loved the library. Oh, I used to love coming.
What did you love about it?
I love the books, and I love the smell of it, just being able to come and look in the card catalog and look up your books. And, it was when we got to come to the library and check out books, that was like heaven for me. I love to read. Wasn't always good about keeping up with them and returning them on time, but it was just, to me, the library here has always been a gem. I used to love to come for, story readings. You would come and have someone read a story to you. When we had to do, as I got older and had to do book reports, I loved, coming here to find a book or two to do my reports on. I love being able to come and sit in a nice quiet room and read, just read about anything, anywhere. So.
Were you aware that last year, I think it was, there was a proposal on the table for us to be taken over, our library to be taken over by the county. Did you know about that?
Yeah, I heard about that.
And that it was decided, because I think the school board had the final vote on it. What would have happened is, do you know what the particulars were?
Not the particular.
Well, the county was going to take it over, and because of that, the Schomburg Museum in the Schomburg in New York was interested, so they would partner with our library, and the county's proposal was that they would take it over, but if at any point we wanted it to revert back to us, we could. And so it was voted down at the meeting. That I saw, the Schomburg representative was there, saying how much she wanted it, and this obviously would make us like would bring us a national presence.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who didn't want it, their idea was that we would be giving away one of our assets. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to know your thoughts on what ended up happening, because it was voted down. The school board voted it down.
I think that's a shame, because it is a gem. But just like a gem, if you don't polish it and cultivate it, what good is it? I think that national exposure and affiliation would have been superb. I think it probably would have been a boon for the city. But, I don't understand the thinking of others, the powers that be, but I see it as being something that would have been wonderful, which is too bad.
I just wanted it on the record, whatever you said. So music, when you went to college for music, was that the violin?
No. I started violin in grade school. I played in the honors orchestra, and then started private lessons and got even better on it. So by the time I got to Kirk, I was in the orchestra. And the last year, your 8th grade year, the way the music department was set up, you got to go visit Shaw. And the band director, or the director of the music, instrumental music at that time, was Mr. Fulton, Alvin Fulton. The director of music was Joseph Riccardi, but he taught at Kirk. He taught orchestra band and jazz band at Kirk. Well, anyway, I love how they would funnel the students. You'd start them in grade school on an instrument, get them in middle school or junior high, and then bring them to high school and expand. Well, he would invite the 8th graders up, and he'd have the rhythm teams play. That was jazz band at Shaw of high school students. I remember thinking, oh my goodness. It wasn't the first time I had heard them play, because my mom was a secretary at Shaw, and she took me to a lot of the performances, the plays at Shaw, the musical concerts. And as a kid, I'm telling you, I felt like I was watching professional productions. I still feel that way. You had some remarkable talent in East Cleveland. I mean, some people have gone on to, lucrative careers in music. Dean Hill, he was one of the actors. Elaine Saihuntis, and they're, still involved in theater and music. Darryl Waters just won a Grammy, maybe a second Grammy, we had so much musical and theatrical talent here. And I felt fortunate in that my mom, took me to see this as a young kid. Well, anyway, back to the field trip to Shaw to see the rhythm teams, I had seen them, and I knew they had violinists at the time. And so my dream or goal was, okay, I'm gonna be sitting there, playing violin. Well, of course, by the time I got to Shaw, they phased the violins out. But the pitch was that we need brass instruments. We're short on brass instruments. So you string players, you might want to think about learning how to play a new instrument. So I said, fine, you know. Over the summer, I signed up to learn how to play French horn. It was called the mellophone or something. So my summer was, you know, trudging up to Shaw in the hot summer, you know, learning how to play this thing, and, you know, a foreign instrument to me. My lips were sore, you know, but I learned how to play it. And then after that, there was band camp. You know, you learn how to march, and then you learn how to play and march. So, and I'm, you know, sometimes I regretted having to give up my summers, you know, because I got to play and things on my street, but it was a good thing because it broke up the monotony of summer. Like, I think that a lot of kids, their abilities are wasted over the summer. I mean, it's 2 or 3 months of nothing, unless you're, you know, parents couldn't afford to take kids on vacations back then, you know. I've since been able to do that with my family, but back then, we never had a family vacation. We might take a day to go to Geauga Lake or Euclid Beach before it closed, or, you know, Cedar Point was a rarity. But just so much downtime in the summer. So, but that changed once I got to 9th grade. From 9th to 12th, my summers were booked. You know, and even before that, a portion was filled with, you know, going to the art museum for their classes or doing stuff at University Circle. So, and we really lived in an ideal spot. Like I said, you could walk to University Circle, but, you know, it's quicker, just hop on the number 6 and catch the bus there.
And the number 6 well, just you explain it.
The number 6 was the bus line, the RTA. It used to be CTS. Cleveland Transit System, but then it's RTA. You get on the number 6 bus that ran all the way downtown to Public Square, all the way to Windermere. And I mean, this community is just ideal.
So now that's called the
Health Line, yeah, which is interesting. And I've you know, as an employee at Cleveland State, sometimes it's quicker to hop on the bus to get to, if you need to go to a meeting or something. One time my dad was hospitalized at Cleveland Clinic. So my lunch hour, I thought I'd go and visit. Well, that was an ordeal. I didn't realize that you had to buy a ticket, and you had to get a ticket from this machine, and the machine doesn't always work. So what do? You get on the bus, you don't have, you try and give the man your money. He's like, nope, I can't take your money. So you're sitting there feeling like a criminal. Then these police get on. You know, just crazy. I mean, change is inevitable, but wow. So I kind of left that alone now.
Pause it for a minute. So I was asking about the music. You went to North Carolina University?
South Carolina State.
For music.
Yes.
So you were
that
explaining how that happened, yeah.
Well, I learned how to play a brass instrument so I could be in the marching band at Shaw. And my junior year, Mr. Fulton left East Cleveland to take a job at South Carolina State. But prior to his leaving, what he'd do every year is the jazz band, which was called the Rhythm Teams, he'd take them on a southern tour. They would tour different college campuses, primarily HBCUs, but, you know, some others. And that would give them exposure to see what college life was like, you know, and let the music department see, hey, this is a talented group of kids. So that gave us exposure to opportunities beyond high school. Students would come back from that and say, yeah, I like Kentucky State, or it was nice in Arkansas, and, you know, or Livingstone, Bishop. that's where I'm going to apply. So then we'd come back to school and meet with the guidance counselor and fill out our college applications, having had that exposure. Well, when he left, Dr. Fulton now, but Mr. Fulton took a job at South Carolina State as one of the band directors. And so he, in that position, was able to offer scholarships, to individuals. My husband went to South Carolina State. He, completed his bachelor's in 4 years, and he went on a partial music scholarship. He had to audition. I didn't. And some might say, well, that's not fair, but Mr. Fulton knew my music ability. He knew what I could do because he taught me. Right. So I received a scholarship to go there. But at first, my mother didn't want me to go. And this was a big point of contention between she and I. It kind of damaged our relationship. She didn't want me to go away to school. They were very protective of me. I was the baby girl and, I guess maybe considered fragile, I don't know. But I wanted to go. I wanted to see something outside of East Cleveland, Ohio. Plus, my boyfriend was there. Well, I shouldn't say plus, that was the major draw, to be honest. So anyway, I went to Ohio University for a quarter. It was too expensive. I was homesick, hated it, but I did well academically there. So to get into South Carolina State, you had to have a solid GPA. And I didn't realize this at the time, but my quarter at OU helped get me in. Plus my grades at Shaw were okay, So that, with the music scholarship, allowed me to go. And I started corresponding with Mr. Fulton. In high school, I used to babysit for him, for his children. And I used to, during the summer job opportunities, I forget what it was called, SYEP or something. One of my summer jobs was to work in the music department and organize music or catalog music and date stamp and all that stuff. So also during that time, I learned how to play the electric bass so that I could be in rhythm teams. So that's, how I wound up at South Carolina State because I couldn't afford Ohio University, didn't really want to be there. In the interim, though, until I could get to South Carolina State, I went to Cleveland State, just so I would not be wasting time. And I took a couple of courses there. I started corresponding with Mr. Fulton and, told him about what I was doing. I'd even invited him back to my graduation because from high school I graduated. And my boyfriend Dennis was a student there, so they were in touch. I wrote and said, I'm graduating. I sent him an invitation and he surprised me. He came, And so, and he talked to my mother about me coming to South Carolina State. She said, nope, I'm not sending her down there, But at any rate, once I had been to college, I was working. I worked at Sears and Roebuck on 86th and Euclid. I could catch the bus from Brightwood there, and then I go
Carnegie.
Yes,
okay.
Carnegie, but it was in between Euclid and Carnegie, and that's what the Playhouse now or something. Yeah, so I worked there.
Well, it used to be the Playhouse. It's not anymore.
Right.
It's then it was the Mocha. Now it's not anymore.
So where was I? Oh, so I had everything in place. Mr. Fulton said, yeah, I know your music abilities. I can give you this scholarship. You've been working, save your money, you can go here. So I saw where I could go. I was afraid to tell my mother. So I went with her to church one Sunday. I figured I'd be safe in church. And we stood up to sing or something. I leaned over and said, by the way, I'm leaving for Orangeburg in about a week. And she was so mad I could just see, the change in her face, So she stopped talking to me. let's see, I think they drove me to the bus station, or she didn't come or something. Anyway, so I rode the Greyhound bus. That was the longest ride. It took like, in a car it's maybe 9 hours. On a bus it's 21. Ugh, all the stops and everything. So, but I wasn't by myself because, like I said, Dennis, my husband, he was a student there. And so we rode down together. I had to stay in a boarding house because there were too many students and they ran out of dorm space. I hated that. One thing about the South, the bugs are like, I mean, you know, you can hold a bug in your hand as a pet. So, and I hated that part. I hated the heat. I remember the first week thinking, what have I got myself into? It was like being in the Army. You'd get up before the crack of dawn so you could practice on the field as the sun's coming up until it got too hot. Then you'd go into the band hall and practice music. Then once the sun sets, you'd come out and be on the field some more. You know, this is 2 weeks before classes start.
Now, what instrument were you playing?
I was playing the mellophone. It's like a French horn, the same fingering, but it's more conducive to marching. It's like a big fat trumpet. And I mean, it was good. It was good exercise, good musical training. It also gave me the opportunity to travel because back up in high school, like I said, in Shaw, not only did the rhythm teams travel, but Mr. Fulton would try and take the band, the marching band, on some kind of a trip. That was the first time I got to go to Disney World, you know, in Florida. And, you know, just some amazing opportunities as a result of living in East Cleveland and being a part of the music department. And then in college at South Carolina State, we traveled as well. We went to every football game. Like in high school, you go to the away games, you know, it's a school bus ride and you're home in the same day. Well, this would, you know, you'd leave, you'd have to make sure to do your work, your class work. Sometimes take it with you on the bus, go to whatever state and play in the game and then load back up and go back to campus. You know, that was fun. Then I got kind of tired of it. It became more of a chore and it wasn't fun. And your entire year is kind of, music is the main factor. It was almost like getting an education was secondary.
Sorry.
Oh.
Okay.
Well, where, you know,
Repeat that last sentence. You said it was almost like.
It was almost like education was secondary. When I first graduated from high school, I wanted to be a journalist. I worked, or I was the feature editor for the high school newspaper. And
What was the name of the paper?
Oh God, was it the Observer? I think that was the name of the paper, the Observer. I wanted to be editor, but I remember Miss Mary Ward, she was a journalism teacher. She said, I think your strength's better as a feature editor. So in addition to writing, I got to choose articles that was going to be in the feature section.
So wait a minute, they had a teacher she wasn't the English teacher, she taught journalism.
She taught some English, but she also taught a journalism class, Mary Ward, and that was great. Learned a lot from her about, we would, you know, get the articles together and then we'd go after school to, where was it? It was at a church because there was a community, East Cleveland Community News, I believe, a paper. And she had it so that we could go there to lay out our school newspaper. You know, we laid out the articles, did the typesetting and everything, and printed them. And that was fun. And the reason I did that was because, well, I wanted my older sister influenced me. She was actually the editor of the paper when she was in school. It's funny how the families worked. If your older siblings did something, then you wanted to do it too. She played the violin, my brother played the violin, I played the violin. That violin got passed down. My mom bought this instrument and she got her money's worth. But I think I was the only one that stuck with it.
Do you know who published that East Cleveland Community newspaper?
I cannot remember who, but I enjoyed it. It was very informative because it told about the politics, what was going on at City Hall, different community resources. I read that, and I even thought about, after high school maybe writing for that, but went off in a different direction. But I really enjoyed journalism. I wanted to be a reporter until I learned what that meant, that sometimes you had to get information when you really didn't want to. You had to get up into someone's face and be persistent. I didn't like that, so I said, okay, maybe a different type of writing is for me. But at any rate, things change. You may have a career plan for yourself, and finances or opportunities, just don't present themselves, and you have to change. So once I got to South Carolina, I chose OU because they had a good journalism reputation. And unfortunately, I had to leave before I really got to delve into it. At South Carolina State, they did not have a journalism program, so I chose English education. I didn't want to be a teacher, although my older sister had been, she had gone to school and became a teacher. But I just, I really didn't want to do that. But I chose English ed, and then once I left South Carolina State, I went back and considered communication at Cleveland State, and then I got off into organizational communication. So, but I would say that being in East Cleveland and part of the East Cleveland City Schools was phenomenal. We had the guidance counselor, her name was Carolyn Smith, I remember. You'd go to meet with her, she'd talk about what do you want to do after school, and she'd help you fill out the application. She gave us the information on, the addresses for the admissions offices, and she would look over your applications. She would proof your essay. You had to write a biographical sketch. And then she'd want to know, the results. You'd get the letters at home. I remember I got accepted at 3 schools. I got accepted to Ashland University, Kent State, and Ohio University. And my mother, said, why didn't you apply to Cleveland State? Well, because I wanted to, the experience of being away from home. But and I think the reason I wanted that was because of the exposure with the music department and going to the different schools and seeing when we went to those schools on those musical tours, we got to stay in the dorms. They would volunteer to let us room with a college student, 2 of us to 1 college student, so we got a first-hand glimpse of what it was like, to be in a dorm and be at college. It didn't give the whole picture, but at least it was exposure. That's one thing I love about what Don Chan is doing, here in East Cleveland with the band, the opportunities that they've had. As a matter of fact, I think in October, they played at South Carolina State for their homecoming, and my family went down for that. So it was good, we could cheer on Shaw and everything. That was a wonderful opportunity.
Right. So When you got married, you said your first place you lived was in those apartments on Fort Hill Boulevard.
Yes.
And then you moved to Cleveland Heights.
Yes.
Why did you move from the apartment?
The apartment, actually, my husband, he had the apartment before we were married. I was still living on Brightwood, and he grew up on Rosemont. And his father.
Where's Rosemont?
Rosemont is actually right, not far from where Heritage is.
Okay.
Because he could walk up his street and be right there at Kirk at the time. So he grew up on Rosemont. When he moved out to be on his own after he finished college, he wanted his own place, and so a friend of ours who we'd also gone to high school, she had an apartment there, and she said there's a vacancy, and so he applied and he got that apartment. So shortly after that, we got married, and that's where we lived. It was 2 bedrooms, and we had first one baby, so it was plenty of room for us. We almost moved into his family home on Rosemont once his mom passed away. And even before she died, she had talked about us coming to live there. And I don't know why we didn't, but it was we almost did live there. I think at the time I didn't want to, though.
So what year was it that you moved to Cleveland Heights?
It was 1986.
And where did you
87.
move? Where did you move to?
We moved up. It was a street off of Taylor called Blanche. And it was in the middle of an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. There was the Jewish school, a couple of synagogues there, the Jewish funeral home, and quite a number of Orthodox Jewish families lived on that street.
And when did you move from there to Richmond Heights?
In 2006.
Why did you move off of that street?
We outgrew the house. And as a matter of fact, I noticed a similar white flight. It reminded me and my husband and I, we talked about it a lot throughout the years. He experienced it too. He talked about when they moved on their street in Rosemont, there were maybe 1 of 2 or 3 black families, and how gradually you saw your friends move away. We saw the same thing on Blanche. The families gradually moved away until, the ones that stayed, I figured it was because they could not move.
Now, is the same thing taking place in Richmond Heights?
To a degree, yes, it is. It sure is.
So you talked about the rollover. Besides the racial makeup, what other changes have you seen take place over the years in East Cleveland?
The socioeconomic change is that I remember when as a child, there was the shopping center at is it Superior and Euclid? I remember when the store, it was called Scott's 5 and 10. That was a big deal, and I remember being allowed to walk there, and there was a little boutique called Jordan's. I don't know if it's still there or not, but my mom used to love to go there. Mr. Jordan, who ran it, he made custom hats and jewelry and handbags, and she loved to shop there. Now, I don't have too much of an occasion or reason to come to East Cleveland, but for a while I was here regularly going to the CEOGC Head Start building. I was working with some teachers there. And just thinking about the changes each time I'd make the drive, how I remember there was an auto dealership too, maybe, I think on Euclid Avenue, and those, long gone. Just a lot of different businesses. Now all you see are maybe phone stores or fast food places, a lot of vacant buildings. Riding here today, I saw the shop, the sign is still there. It says Barbara Ann's Beauty Salon. That's where I used to get my hair done. When I lived in Cleveland Heights, I'd drive down Taylor and make the turn and go there. That's long gone, and just a lot of, it's almost like a ghost town. On my street, a couple years ago, I took my youngest son, Joseph, to ride down there. He, and my house is gone, and most of the homes are gone, just vacant lots, And he said, "Wow." And he had been to the Brightwood house. My youngest daughter has no recollection. She never got to go there, and he doesn't really remember. He was a toddler, but it's kind of sad to me. I remember Lakeview Cemetery. It's right there. We almost moved into a house on Forest Hills, but the cemetery was in the backyard, and my mom said that was kind of creepy, and I'm so glad we didn't move there. But I can remember having to walk from the music settlement sometimes when I'd miss the bus, because I had to transfer. I would catch the 6th and then catch something that goes down 116th to Wade Park, but anyway. So one time I missed the bus, I walked up 116th or 118th, I don't know. Then I had to walk past Lakeview Cemetery. And I remember the dilemma was walk on the side where the cemetery or on the other side where Koteki Monuments was. I was kind of a chicken, scary little kid. But just being able to walk, and feel safe, somewhat safe, that was, a little skinny girl carrying a violin, I could actually walk and not have to worry about being beat up or robbed. That was, I was scared, but I couldn't see me having my kid do that, in this day and age, anywhere, even in Richmond Heights, to be honest with you. But that's one thing I miss, being able to be on foot. You could walk to school. It was a long walk, all the way from Brightwood to Shaw, but to be able to do it and be social with your friends. You could stop off at McDonald's for some fries or Wendy's, A couple times I've driven along Euclid when school let out, and, it's just not really what I remember it being at all.
In what way?
Well, kids are cursing. There's big packs of kids. Back then you walked home in groups, but it just wasn't. It didn't seem like a big gang of kids spilling out into the street. You just didn't walk in the street. You stayed on the sidewalk because that's what it was for. Even in the wintertime, And, I'm not saying that we didn't curse or do things, but we knew, for some reason, we knew enough not to be caught doing it, because there was the fear of reprisal from parents, because if your parents didn't see you, Miss So-and-so would, and she would tell your parent. Nowadays, and I don't pass judgment on the children at all. You do the best with what you can, and that includes children, You don't have someone to care enough to tell you that, And if you see that if you want to be a certain way, your peers are going to, attack you for that, what can you do? I applaud the kids that come to school considering what they're up against, maybe not having the money to get the things that they need, or not having somebody who would beat your butt if you don't do your homework, or if you living in a community where there's drugs being sold, or someone might abduct you, and you still want to get up and go to school and learn something, to me, that's a hero. You know, that's what it's all about.
So my next question is, has racism impacted you personally, and if so, how?
Yes. You mean when I was living in East Cleveland?
Oh, you know what? Yes, but I want to back up a little bit.
Okay.
You talked about how the city has transitioned.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think contributed to those changes?
I think that, well, for one thing, the families that moved in, the hard-working, blue-collar, or up-and-coming black families moving in, and whites leaving, that does something to your psyche. You know, you may not be able to express it in words. You may not, may not even on some level be aware of it, but it does something to you. It tells you, to me, it embeds a feeling of being less than. And you can, maintain, and like my parents did, they maintained and they worked and they promoted their children to, go on, but it still does something to you. It did something to us as children. Like I said, I lost friends, good friends. One time I was impacted. There was this little other girl, I think her name was Patty, I don't know. But her dad, another single parent, her dad lived in the really tall apartment building on the corner of Superior and Forest Hills. It's a real tall.
Lakeview Towers?
I think that's what it's called, I don't know. And this one time in second grade, a field trip, we went to the top of the building. You could see the skyline of downtown and everything. But her dad lived there, and she and I were good friends, and her dad asked my mom, could I come over sometimes after school to play? And, Mom, okay. But then, I got tired of always going to her apartment. I said, why can't you come to my house sometimes? I want you to meet my friends and, play in my backyard and do this and that. And she said, okay. Well, her dad said no. And my mother got angry about that.
Mm-hmm.
She said, well, why can't, I'm not good enough, or she's not good enough. We're not good enough to have your child, but I trust my child with you. So that ended our friendship. Something like that happened with myself and my oldest daughter when we lived in Cleveland Heights. My daughter was in kindergarten, and she had this good friend, Matthew Ruderman, I remember his name. And they lived in University Heights, but they went to Cleveland Heights. So they would play, and her mom, Mrs. Ruderman, wanted my daughter to come play at their house. So I said, sure. So then I said, well, I want to reciprocate. Let's have Matthew over. No. It was, well, okay, a reluctance. And then she canceled, And so then I said, you know what? It's the same thing. I don't need that. So my daughter suffered, their friendship suffered as a result. And, so that happens, and that does something to you. It's like a microcosm racism. And because you look at things, you say, well, what's the difference here? They live in a home. She's married. She has a son. I'm married. I have my daughter. We both work. What's the difference? Why can't he come to our house? Why can she come to yours? So it makes you question, not so much yourself, but it questions, why am I seen this way by others? So
what do you think happened to cause East Cleveland to become the way it is now?
I would say the white families moved away, and the black families moved in, and then the businesses, I believe, the white families moved away, and then I think there was a stigma that the white-owned businesses didn't want to, well, we can't get more customers to come in because nobody wants to come into a city that's predominantly black. So they moved away. I also think, and I don't have any proof, but I think there has been some mismanagement of city funding. And I don't know why. I really wasn't big on politics when I was here. I was younger, although I did participate in a few council races as part of high school, passing out literature. I remember when the president came, Jimmy Carter was campaigning. He came to Shaw, and I got to meet him, and
Before he was president?
yeah, when he was campaigning, he came and spoke at Corps Lounge. But I just think that, something happened to, I don't know if the funds were mismanaged, if, people took advantage or what, but I remember living on Brightwood, and I remember the garbage, trucks coming a certain day. I remember street cleaners coming down Brightwood, little old Brightwood, and there wasn't, potholes being fixed immediately. It's just, and I'm wondering what happened, what happened to the money for that? Those services went away. And then, you had families that moved into the city that were, all they wanted was a chance, a nice home, beautiful, beautiful physical environment, the park, what a treasure to be able to go up there and play and be at the pavilion, at the lagoon, and, tennis courts. You want it better for your kids, but then there's these other things, businesses are moving, being replaced by things that you don't necessarily need. Then the quality of service is going down, and then, the value of homes going down so that, people could buy them easily. And this may sound biased, but I don't mean for it to be. And you would have people that will move into homes that are not looking to become homeowners. They just they were transitional. Let's say if someone owned the home and they rented it out. Well, if you don't own something, your mindset is going to be a little different than someone that's transitional. Now, that's not across the board, it's just a generalization. And that if it's not yours, you're not invested in it. So, and then if you own it, you may not be the best landlord, and you're not going to come back and make sure your tenants are living in the best, especially when they may not do what they could do to maintain it. So I think that impacted certain things. Someone didn't care enough to enforce landlords to, upkeep their property. And so you have buildings that just stay dormant and vacant. Of course, that's a magnet for someone who's going to do something illicit or illegal, Just a lot of negative factors to impact the quality of the city. And it breaks my heart, but I don't have any answers.
Do you think drugs had any impact on the city?
Big, yeah, and not just here. I think it's probably more of a noticeable impact because East Cleveland was like the perfect little city, self-contained, just beautiful gems here, the Forest Hills Park, the hospital, a small school district, just, auto shops, hotel. It had everything. It was, on a smaller scale. So
what hotel? You talking about McCall's?
Yes.
That was a nice hotel in the past?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a motel, you know, but it wasn't. If you had a need to stay there, it was nice. It was a nice hotel, but you know, who'd want to stay there? But yeah, it's just.
Were you around when drugs began to come in? And what year was that, if you remember?
I would say maybe the mid to late 80s. It started, and it became a big factor on Brightwood.
This was crack.
Yes, crack and marijuana, but definitely crack. And my parents were still living on the street at that time. And I had, you know, gone away to school and gotten married, you know, but yeah, there was a dope house. I mean, the only thing missing was the sign that said, "This is where you buy your dope," because everybody knew. And people were coming, you know, from outside of the community to buy drugs on the street. When I would go to visit my parents, you know, they would have to learn, you know, where you were going because they were there. And they would, you know, if you slowed down, they would come up to your car because they assumed, why else are you here? So I learned, you know, you keep my doors locked, keep going and go right into the, you know. But then they got to know, I mean, there's a human side too. They knew my father and my mother. They knew not to be near conducting business near the house. And, you know, that was a matter of respect because, I mean, they had weapons. They could have been like, you know, we do what we want. This is, you know, but there was that level of respect. They even, once my mom passed away, they call my father Chief because he is, you know, he's part Choctaw Indian. And I guess he fits the stereotypical stoic, you know, silent Indian, Native American. And they'd say, "Hey, Chief, how's it going?" They'd shovel his driveway or shovel, you know, do stuff like that. And it was like, you know, it was a mutual respect. They knew my parents, my dad didn't condone that, you know.
You mentioned your dad was part Native American. How is he Native American?
His grandparents were Native American.
On his mother and father's side?
On his mother's side.
Okay.
And he was raised by them primarily. Mm-hmm. He was born in Selma, or actually even a smaller town, but he says, you know, it was like maybe the outskirts of Selma. Watley, Alabama, and he talks about going to Indian Ridge Lutheran School, and you know, he talked about his grandfather and his mannerisms, and he would, you know, laugh about it. He would talk about how he combed his hair. You know, his hair was straight, and so he just combed his hair, and he remembers that. Well, he lived with them until he was 12, and his mom, my grandmother, had come to Cleveland, you know, and she left him behind, and she took his sister. It was just the two of them. And so he stayed with he called them Mama and Papa, his grandparents, and sometimes his sister would come down, you know, summers to spend time. But then when he turned 12, my grandmother sent for him, and he talked about how sad he was to leave them. He was glad to come live with his mother, but sad to leave them. And he said his grandfather's final words to him was, "Be obedient." And he talked about, you know, the culture shock. That's not his words, but that's what he described, coming from the country down south to the city and having people make fun of his accent, how he would say chunk the ball, and it was throw the ball. And he talked about the suit he wore, how the pants were too short, and how he stayed with his mom and her husband, not his father, and his cousins from his father's side, and how they made him feel, he was the odd man out. And so he had a lot of that, and my dad was really quiet and soft-spoken, but once you got him going, he would have been excellent to give you, a history of living in East Cleveland. But he has Alzheimer's. And he lives in a home. He was living with me for a couple of years, but now, he got to be too much. So he's in a home. But his stories, one of my favorite things used to be to sit and listen to him talk, about growing up here and the different things he's done. And sometimes now when I go to visit him, his short-term memory is horrible, but his long-term memory is good. So I can tell him the things he's told me, and he'll say, how can you remember that? And I said, because you told me.
Mm-hmm.
So
where's the home? Where is it?
he's in manor care. I don't like it, but I don't think I would like any nursing home. But I can't, I had him with me, and he would wander off, and I've got to work, and I just couldn't maintain his safety. So now I know that he is safe. But yeah, he education was important to both my parents, but it's different. It's not like they weren't, you've got homework, you do it. Well, what do you need to do it? Okay, here's the paper, the pens, the books, go to the library. But today it's, if you have the parental involvement, I'm sitting down with my kids and they're doing homework and I'm explaining, and, that's different to me. I can't help but think, somebody help me. But it's different, it's a different world we live in, so.
Can you remember a time that the community here in East Cleveland fought for something? Can you turn just a little bit?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Let's see. The only thing I can remember is maybe the schools, being on strike, or I think. Well, I'm familiar with the recent battle for Huron Road Hospital, which is a shame. I just don't understand that one at all.
How so? What do you mean?
A trauma center right in the middle of trauma. And to take it away, it was something, I can't remember what it was. Oh, the instance where the police shot the 2 passengers, and talking about the possibility of them surviving had they been able to go to Huron Road. I just don't understand. You want to believe that there's some missing piece, but it just, to your rational mind, it makes so much sense to do certain things, but they don't happen. I don't understand how that, it's, the historical significance of the hospital for one thing, if not for the fact that it had become a trauma unit, it makes no sense. I just don't understand that.
Do you think the surrounding institutions and cities have impacted East Cleveland?
You mean negatively or positively?
Either way.
Negatively, yes, Cleveland. There's some pockets of Cleveland that have spilled over into East Cleveland. terms of drugs or illegal activities, but positively, there's University Circle. The proximity to East Cleveland is just, that, like I said, we took advantage of it growing up, and I still think there, are advantages. I don't know if they're doing this in the schools now, but it seems like with you have a teaching hospital. If you have a good math and science curriculum at the school, there seems like some opportunity in that instance. I think that's a benefit. Also, not just University Circle, but there are other colleges, in close driving distance. There's John Carroll, a private college. Baldwin Wallace really isn't that far away. Of course, Cleveland State, I think there are some definite positives to being here. You didn't ask me about this, but it is something that's kind of lingering in my mind. The talk about merging Cleveland with East Cleveland. A part of me thinks that would be a good thing because, left to its own devices for so long, and it just hasn't, the city has not been able to get on sure footing. But another part of me, the nostalgia, says, this was such a wonderful community, almost like a Mecca. And that's not to say that, it may sound being a bit elitist or exclusive, but no, I don't think that's the case. I think that what's wrong with having a suburb, a thriving suburb that's predominantly African American? There's nothing wrong with that. And I am very much pro-diversity and inclusion, but there's nothing wrong with having a separate identity, in the midst of a world. And if there was a way to maintain the city on its own, I think that would be wonderful.
So then what is your vision for East Cleveland in the future?
Honestly, it's or realistically, my vision is just seeing bleakness. But my hope is that one business or one person with the capital would make an investment here, and then that would spread, would catch on. If there could be one business to thrive here, one corporation that would say, hey, I'm going to take the risk, I'm going to, and I'm going to pull my partners in, and then I'm going to make opportunities for the residents here, to be employed, to work in their community and invest in it and stay here. But it's a lot of factors. There's the economic factor, there's the societal factor, and having a family, and family is not what it used to be when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, mom, dad, children. I mean, it wasn't totally like that back then, but now, you have a single parent, be it female or male. You've got foster kids. You've got, same sex or same gender couples rearing kids. It's different. And so society has to understand that you can't take an old framework and expect what's existing now to, follow suit. Like I said, I think that the economic piece is key. If you can get someone who would be willing to invest a business here, and then pull in partners, that would be a strong foothold. In terms of politicians or governments, it's so much mismanagement from the past, and sometimes you're so busy putting out fires that you did not create that you can't focus on what's standing or what remains. It's a daunting task, but also in the circle of life, they can get so bad before they have to start taking a turn towards the good. And you see little glimpses of hope, like the possibility of this library merging, that was a glimmer of hope. Well, maybe it can be revisited, I don't know, but I do think that would be a positive. What's happening with the music factor at Shaw with Don Chan, that's a ray of hope. They've had national exposure, international exposure, and you have, someone who's committed to the children, and they respect him and they want to give, but these little things exist in isolation. If they can all come together, if you can just get a like-minded people committed towards a common goal of making this great. I don't like to hear people say making it as great as it once was. You can't go back and relive the past. It cannot be what it was. But it has the phenomenal potential to be something, amazing like it was, and even beyond. That's my hope for the community.
So talk about what major issues need to be addressed in order to better the neighborhoods, community overall in the city.
Well, again, it does boil down to economics. You've got to have some reason for people that are here or people that are going to be here or want to stay here. You have to have a reason for them to work towards something. If you had a business here, like GE, if you had a business here that could employ the residents, if you had some, the education piece where students are being trained to, stay in the area and work on the community, maybe they'll go elsewhere eventually, but there has to be some sort of a base. And then there's the issue of safety. I think that might have been the appeal for some people to merge with Cleveland, to have a bigger, safety force or, but there has to be some economic foundation and commitment. It's not going to happen overnight for sure. It may be a span of 5 to 10 years, but for that base to grow. And the people that are willing to invest in it have to be committed. It can't be for personal gain. It has to be for the benefit of the whole.
What would you be prepared to do to participate in making East Cleveland better?
I would not be prepared to move here because I still have a young child. And I don't want to experiment with her education. But aside from that, I am willing to, I could invest some time and some effort, maybe even some money in, I know there's an Adopt a Street program, something of that nature. But I would consider living here if I didn't have a young child, But it would have to be, I would have to see some evidence of an economic base, of, some potential for growth. And I would want to do it with a group of like-minded individuals, who are also committed to doing something of that nature.
How young is your daughter?
She's 12.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to say?